Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, actually, good afternoon, because it just hit noon. Welcome to my kitchen. This is Cooking with Joel. Before I get into the sauce, because that's what you guys are all tuning into, there are a few things that we need to talk about. I'm going to move you guys closer to me. And I'm going to start right now. We're going to get right into this video. Before you make the sauce, there are a few things I want to warn you guys about. One, this is a long process. The sauce itself takes about 4.5 to 5 hours to cook. And that's depending on the amount. If you're doing really big batches, and I'm talking about, I have a half bushel, right there. You guys have seen it. It's the same size as when I did the peeled tomatoes. If you're going to do more than a half a bushel, if you're going to do a full bushel, or if you're going to do even more than that, you might be having to do this over multiple days. Half a bushel I can usually do in one day, and that's what we're going to do. But before we get into any of that, we need to discuss on some things that you want to have in your kitchen. The first thing you're going to need colanders. You're going to need some way to drain your tomatoes when you cut them. Now, I have multiple drainers, and I also have multiple cookie sheets or baking sheets, and that's what you want because you need a place for the water to drop. You do not want a lot of water in your sauce because then it makes your sauce very runny. The second thing that you're going to need is you're going to need large pots, and I'm talking large pots. If you try to do this in an 8-quart or small pot, you're going to be at it, if you're going to do a half pint or a full bushel, you're going to be at it for hours and days. I'm fortunate I have stock pots that are quite big, and we're going to utilize those. I'll show you step-by-step instructions as we get to those parts. The other thing to think about before you even attempt to make this recipe is you're going to need a way to separate the skins and the seeds from the rest of the sauce. Now, I believe this is the mandolin in press that I have. And I can put this over one of my pots. And it's manual. You turn it and it separates the skins from the and the seeds from the rest of the sauce. Now, you can, if you're fortunate, if you're one of those wonderful people that has a tomato press, that is what you really want. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those that has the ability to have one. I will tell you, tomato presses are not cheap. They're incredibly expensive. I've been looking. I know how much they are. The ones that are really good for the amount of sauce that I do range in the high $100 category, and they can go well into the thousands. As a matter of fact, I have some friends that I know are Italian that have the machines, and one lady that I kind of know, her machine is well into the thousands because it's an industrial tomato press. Now, I don't live close enough to her to be able to use it, so I have to do things manually. But that's something that you might want to think about before you even attempt to make this kind of a sauce. Now, can you make this sauce on its own and not have to do all of this in a small batch? You can. It's going to be a lot different, though, than the recipe that you're going to follow. This is just if you want to can sauce for the entire winter months. If you're not one of those fortunate people that live in the South, like Florida, parts of California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, the states that are warm all year round, that don't get the snow and the freezing conditions in the wintertime and can grow tomatoes all year around, then you don't need to do this, because you could actually make sauce every time you need to make sauce. I'm not one of those people. We have winters and they get quite cold, so I like to can my sauce and have it on the ready all winter long, and I use it for multiple things. So those are just things to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Now, if you don't have anything like this, and you can get this from Williams-Sonoma, they also carry them on Amazon. You just want to look at tomato presses for doing presses. You can do it the old-fashioned way, which is how my great-grandparents used to do it, and that's using cheesecloth, using cloths, and doing it that way, and separating the skins from the peel. And I'll show you guys how hard that part really is, and that's the most time consuming of that. But I'm gonna get everything set up, and then we're gonna get right into this recipe. So stay tuned on Cooking with Joel. This is the tomato sauce. Okay, I'm back, everybody, and I'm gonna try to make these videos not quite as long segments, because otherwise my phone battery is going to die, and then I have to figure out how to record on other things. I am looking at camcorders right now, so I have something other than my iPhone to record on, but since these are so long of videos, sometimes I have to do that. Now, you might be looking at me saying, well, you wore this when you did the Gardening with Joel shirt. Why are you wearing the same clothes? I'm going to address that. I'm wearing something old that if I splash on, I can throw it right in the dishwasher, and I don't need to worry about having good clothes on. So, right now, I've got all three. I've got two of my big pots, and I have my biggest stock pot over here. Right now on the stove, and this is going to be the same exact thing that you did for the jams, that you did for the pickles, and that you did for the peeled tomatoes, is you want to sterilize. You want to sterilize all your jars. They're in the dishwasher. I'm sterilizing the lids right now. I'm going to get way ahead of myself, but the recipe, you want your lids and your bands in your jars once the sauce finishes its second cook. You want them handy, because you need to when you start putting the sauce in the jars, you need to put the band and the lid on right away. And this time, there is no process time, because you're going to continuously boil the sauce and jar the sauce as it's boiling. There is no processing. You don't need to process them. You put them right on the table underneath the blanket. This time you're going to turn them upside down, and you're going to leave them be for 24 hours. Same process. So we'll get into that in a few minutes. I am smoking. The other thing you need, and this goes back to when I did the peeled tomatoes, is you need fresh oregano. Oh my God. Fresh basil. This recipe uses fresh basil. Again, it has to be fresh. This recipe will not work if you use the dry basil. Now, you can use the dry basil once you start to make an Italian dish. I do that in the winter because obviously I've never had success growing basil indoors, but you can use that. But for the initial process of the canned tomato sauce, fresh is much better than dry. So you're going to need that, and that's all you're going to need. It's just going to be the tomato sauce with the basil. And then later on, when we start to get into the Italian series, I will show you how to doctor up your sauces and actually turn them into great sauces. So this is just the base. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to finish setting up, and I'll be back in a bit. Okay, I'm back. We're going to get started. I'm going to show you the setup that I use that works for me best. And that is, right now, All 3 of these pots on the stove are all empty. And you want to do that initially. You want to keep them empty. You also want to make sure that they're fully washed. I'm going to rinse them out and maybe soap a couple that I haven't used in a while. I have my sheets here with a couple of my sieves, and then on the main table. And you're going to want to make sure you have a great area to do this, because it will take a lot of area to do. But I have a couple of sieves on this cookie sheet, and then I have my great big colander, and I have a bowl. And you want to do that because this process to do the tomatoes is much different than when you did the peeled tomatoes. As a matter of fact, you're not going to peel the tomatoes. But what you are going to do is the same step, the same first step that you did for the peeled tomatoes. And that's, you want to go through all of your tomatoes, making sure there are no rotten tomatoes. There are no tomatoes that are green or not ripe, or very, very, very tiny tomatoes. Put those on the side. You can always use those for salads. Now, this happened to be one in my garden that has a little something got to it, and I'm going to show you. Teeth mark. I'm going to put that off to the side. I'm not going to use that in the sauce. You want the best tomatoes that you can do. Now, if some of your tomatoes are not fully ripe, put them off to the side, because you do not want an unripe tomato in the sauce. It can throw the entire sauce out. It's also going to be a lot harder to cook that tomato down into a sauce because it's not fully ripe. So, what you want to do, again, go through all of your tomatoes, picking out the bad ones, the unripe ones, or the really, really teeny tiny tomatoes. Once you've done that, you're going to wash them twice. You're going to rinse them, clean any dirt that's on them off, and do another rinse. Now, if you are fortunate enough and you have one of those great big containers, like I showed you with the peeled tomatoes, you might have to go back and watch the peeled tomato first video. I show you my setup of what I have. You're going to dump your tomatoes, and that makes the rinsing out a lot easier. Unfortunately, today, I'm more limited on my sink space because you can see half of the sink has clean dishes in it since my dishwasher is gone. So, I'm going to stop the video. You guys don't need to see me clean the tomatoes. I already did that with the peeled tomatoes. I'll be back once those are done, and I'll show you the next step. I'm back for one quick second. I'm just now starting to rinse the first part of the tomatoes. And I will tell you, if you're limited on space, if you're doing this solo, what I would suggest doing is not doing all of washing the tomatoes at once. You're going to want to wash all of them before you start anything, but do them in small batches. It'll make working with them a lot easier, especially if you have a bowl. Once these are washed, what you're going to predominantly do, if you have multiple strainers, this is the best thing to do, or multiple bowls, is divvy them up in the bowls, or put them in the sieves, and allow any water that's on them to drain off. And then we'll get into the next phase. That might make it a little bit easier for you guys so that you guys aren't overwhelmed with thinking, I have a half bushel of tomatoes. That's a lot of tomatoes. Now, the other thing to think about, if you're new to this and you're going to try to do both the peeled tomatoes and the sauce tomatoes, and you're going to can, this is not for the faint of heart, and this is not really for the beginning canner. Although you can do this, but I will tell you, get a half bushel. If you're brand new to this, divide your tomatoes in half. Keep your largest tomatoes on the side. And by large, well, that's kind of small. I don't really have two large tomatoes in here. They might be at the bottom. But keep your really big tomatoes off to the side. Use those as the peeled tomatoes. Your smaller tomatoes can be your sauce tomatoes. And that'll make it much easier. And I will tell you, if you do that, don't do both things in one day, because you're not going to you're going to drive yourself nuts trying to do it in one day. So stick to either peeled tomatoes on the first day or the sauce on the first day, and then go back the next day or even a day after and then do your peeled tomatoes. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse the tomatoes. We'll be back after they're washed and I'll show you what we're going to do next. Okay, I'm back for a second. I thought I'd show you what a big tomato versus a little tomato looks like. So if you're going to separate your tomatoes, these big guys, keep these on the side and do these as whole peeled tomatoes, and do these little ones as your sauce tomatoes. That makes it easy if you're going to split a half bushel and you're going to do half peeled, half sauce. And again, like I said, do one at a time. Do one day. So do peeled tomatoes on day 1 and then sauce tomatoes on day 2. Or you could flip it. It really doesn't matter. But don't try to do both on the same day. So that was just a quick tidbit. I'll be back. I gotta keep washing. Okay, y'all, I'm back. Today's Monday. It's the 14th. We're doing the tomato sauce. It took me a good minute. It took me almost an hour to wash all of these tomatoes over here. And I've got them sitting. You want to make sure to keep at least 1 or 2 sieves empty where you don't put anything in. That's why, like I said, having an industrial size works the best for me, because as I'm doing this, I can put the tomatoes in there. I am smoking. I'm taking a little bit of a break. I'll hurry up and describe the next part. For the next part, you're going to need salt, a sharp knife, and a garbage can handy. Now, because I have so much space taken up on the table, it's going to be a little awkward where I place you guys. So you guys may not be seeing this up close. I'm going to try to get you as up close as possible while I do this. And you're going to want a fairly sharp paring knife. And I would suggest a paring knife and nothing bigger, because you don't really need anything really big for this. I'm taking you guys into the dining room, which is a horrible mess. Now, I did mention the tote. I actually, with a half bushel, did not need to use that. I just used my biggest mixing bowl. And I'm grabbing my good big green egg knife. I'm going to put you guys down. Hopefully you don't fall, because these are very, very sharp and I don't want to cut myself. Okay, now I'm going to ask my doggy to move, and hopefully my big butt doesn't knock the tea that we have stacked over there. Okay, so I'm going to kind of angle you. Like I said, you may or may not. I'm going to put you guys over here for a second, because you guys will see on the thing. Now, if you remember with the peeled tomatoes, we boiled the tomatoes. You're not going to do that right now to take skins off. What you are going to do is you're going to start cutting your tomatoes. And any bobbles that you have right here, you want to cut those out. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut the front end of your tomato off. And then I just look it over. And if there's any bobble, just cut it off. Cut your tomato in half, and you're going to want to remove this stem part. So I'm just going to peel that off, and then what you're going to do is you're going to cut your tomatoes in half and drop them. So you're going to cut the little stem part out, cut them in half, and make sure you put them in a colander, because what you want to do at this point is you want the water to drip out of the tomato. Now, once you have a good amount of tomatoes, and I'm not talking, don't go all the way to the top. What you're going to do is you're going to add a little bit of salt and mix with your hands. So make sure your hands are clean. You're going to do this for all of the tomatoes, and this is where I said you're going to need multiple colanders, because this makes a lot of tomatoes, especially when you cut them in half. So I'm going to stop the video. Well, actually, let's do another one. So this is a pretty big guy. what I'm just going to do is just cut the top off, cut him in half, take out the little stem. And if they're big, what you can do is you can actually cut them down to be more manageable. You could just cut them in half, and sometimes that's what I do. We'll do one more. Sorry, my husband's yelling at one of the dogs downstairs. We're just gonna take, again, we're just gonna take this little stem thing out. We're gonna cut the tomato in half. Do the same thing for the other side and cut the tomato in half. And that's all you're gonna do. You're just gonna continue to do that for all the tomatoes. I'll be back in a little bit to show you the salt that I put in, and then we'll continue.